how's that for a background with Elizabeth there? Is that okay?
It's lovely. Yeah, it looks perfect. Is everybody all good to go?
Yeah.
Lovely. All right, letting everybody in now. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Just waiting on the last few people to come in from the waiting room. Lovely. I might get started. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am currently seated, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I am so pleased to be here with you tonight for this discussion of Only Happiness Here, In Search of Elizabeth von Arnim, with Jessica White and Gabrielle Carey. And before I hand you over to our speakers tonight, I just want to quickly reiterate some of the information that was mentioned in the email you were sent earlier with your link to join us this evening. And so first of all, you have all been placed on mute and you'll remain so throughout the event, but that doesn't mean that we won't be having a Q&A session. Gabrielle is keen to answer your questions. It will just look a little bit different. So in order to ask questions, I'd like you to send them to me via the chat box. If you can't see it right now, then it should be towards the lower left of your screen, but I will be sharing the link to purchase your copy of Only Happiness Here shortly. And so it will pop up then if you can't see it right now or find it. So type your questions there, they'll come straight through to me and I will read them out later on in the evening when I'm prompted to do so by Jessica and Gabrielle. And I also want to mention that at the moment at Avid Reader, we have a promotion on for all of our event attendees. And that is if you use the code EVENT, E-V-E-N-T, at checkout, when you make a purchase on our website, then you'll receive 10% off your order. So as I said, I'm going to be posting the link to purchase your copy of Only Happiness Here, and that applies site-wide. So I recommend that you get in while we're still offering that promotion to make the most of it and purchase your copies of tonight's book. And so it is now my pleasure to introduce Gabrielle Carey. Gabrielle is the author of novels, biography, autobiography, essays, articles, and short stories. She teaches writing at the University of Technology, Sydney, where her infatuation with Randolph Stowe is happily tolerated. In conversation with Gabrielle tonight is Jessica White. Jessica is a lecturer and researcher at the University of Queensland and is the award-winning author of A Curious Intimacy, Entitlement, and Hearing Maud most recently. And now before I hand you over to Jessica and Gabrielle, we have Madonna Duffy, who is publishing director at UQP and Gabrielle's publisher. And Madonna would like to say a few words before the conversation begins. So Madonna, over to you.
Thanks, Emma Kate, and hello everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded land that I'm speaking from tonight, also the land of the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and to pay my respects to all their elders, past and present. Thank you, of course, to Avid Reader and to Emma Kate for hosting tonight's event. They've got a massive event schedule this month. I don't think Emma Kate slept, probably, or at least she's not had a night when she hasn't been doing a book launch. And thank you for your support of them by being here tonight and also purchasing a book where you can. It will help them to keep doing what they're doing, which is creating one of the most vibrant literary communities in the country. And thank you all for being here tonight to listen to Gabrielle Carey talk about her new book. Sorry, let me just do my publisher holding up the new book just so you can see it all, Only Happiness Here. I can't wait to hear her and Jessica talk about it in their conversation. I published Gabrielle's last book, the wonderful memoir Moving Among Strangers, which was about her family's relationship with the author Randolph Stowe, and which won the Prime Minister's Prize for non-fiction. We were talking about future projects after that, and Gabrielle mentioned that she was keen to write a book about the famous turn of last century author Elizabeth von Arnim. Elizabeth who, I thought. I did some research and was fascinated, became quickly fascinated by this brilliant and witty author who'd been born in Sydney and yet ended up living all over the world and was internationally famous and wealthy from her writing in an era when it was difficult for women to achieve any independent success. I also realised I'd seen a film of one of her novels in the early 90s. Some of you may remember it, The Enchanted April, with Miranda Richardson and Joan Plowright, which I hadn't realised at the time was based on an Elizabeth von Arnim novel. I discovered many of Elizabeth's novels are still in print, actually, through Vintage and Virago's classic series, which I thought, you know, any book that can be in print, you know, 100+ years after publication really tells you a lot about how that story has stood the test of time. And I realised too that Elizabeth and her books were well ahead of their time in their representation of women and our often thwarted pursuit of happiness. Gabrielle Carey can make even the most mundane subject interesting. So when she proposed a book on Elizabeth, her life and work, and how it resonated for her, I was hooked. Only Happiness Here is a rich and absorbing study of Elizabeth von Arnim and Gabrielle's own quest for the elusive state of happiness and how our reading life can transform our state of mind. A recent review of Only Happiness Here by Readings in Melbourne, who we all love as much as Avid Reader, but when I'm in Brisbane, Avid Reader's my favourite. When I'm in Melbourne, Readings is my favourite. This review talks about how perfectly Elizabeth von Arnim invokes the happiness and subversion to be found in one's own actions. This quote from the book, from Elizabeth herself, sums up how much we all need to find joy right now, I think. She says, "If I could only dig and plant myself, I did one warm Sunday and run back very hot and guilty into the house and get into a chair and behind a book and look languid just in time to save my reputation." UQP is so proud to be publishing Gabrielle once again, and we know this is a book that you will all love. Gabrielle's UQP editor Jacqueline and publicist Louise are also now both obsessed with Elizabeth von Arnim, as you will be too. So I'll leave you now with Gabrielle and Jessica to talk about Only Happiness Here. Congratulations, Gabrielle, and enjoy the night. Thank you.
Thank you, Madonna. I would like to add my congratulations as well. I think this is hands down one of the best books that I've read this year. I'm showing my copy as well, so that it's imprinted on your memory. I laughed all the way through, and it's a book about happiness, but I also felt uplifted by the end of it. It makes you happy. And I laughed because I think Gabrielle and Elizabeth, her research subject, share the same droll sense of humour. And I think, as Madonna said, that's what we really need in this disaster of a year, which is the year of plague. So we've got a biography of Elizabeth von Arnim, born in 1866. She died in 1941, but it's spliced with pieces of memoir about Gabrielle's life. And throughout the book, you can see how reading Elizabeth's novels and reading about her life helped Gabrielle change her perspective on things after a particularly grim period. So Gabrielle, I thought maybe we could start with a bit of a discussion about who Elizabeth von Arnim was, and how you came across her.
Who she was. Well, I think one of the interesting things about her is that she is an Australian. I still think of her as an Australian. I think there's something about it that's very Australian, even though she left the country when she was 3. I think another part of her that is pretty fascinating is that she could have been a musician. She could have been a very accomplished keyboard and organ player and composer, but because of the time she was born, that wasn't allowed for women. How did I discover her? Well, at the end of one of my series of disastrous relationships, my dear friend Ursula Dubosarski lent me an Elizabeth von Arnim book, and it, you know, and that was from there. I just the magic was, it just wove its spell, and I was enchanted. And I thought that was about 5 years ago, but when I talked to her, she said, "Oh no, that was 15 years ago." Anyway, so I've been under her spell for 15 years now.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Because as Madonna mentioned in that review, there's this real tension in her life between happiness and trying to maintain happiness, and also her writing life and a sense of self-containment. And this often miserable circumstances she found herself in because she was a woman living at the turn of the 20th century. And one of the people who made her miserable was her husband, her first husband.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think one of the things that made her miserable right from her, you know, late teens, early 20s was the pressure to get married. I mean, she didn't really want that. She was always after freedom, but the pressure was too much, and there wasn't really, you couldn't not get married. And so she was kind of, it was almost pretty much like an arranged marriage, I suppose. You know, this count turns up, he's wealthy, his first wife's just dropped dead, you know, and they just said, "Oh, here you go," because Elizabeth by that stage was 23, which is just about an old maid. And look, I think I think he was probably really charming with her at the beginning, and she says it repeatedly in her books, the change that happens as soon as you marry someone, you know, she talks about the Nightingale song that suddenly stops. But I also think that they went on a honeymoon. This is the first husband, obviously, the Prussian Count. And that apparently was a disaster. So like the sex really didn't work. Much later, she confessed to H.G. Wells that her first husband didn't smell right. So I think if the pheromones aren't there, like if you just think, "Oh God, on top of everything else, he doesn't smell right," like it would have been very tricky. So yeah, but she was, what I think is quite amazing about her is her resilience. I mean, I think she realized quite early on that this guy really wasn't her soulmate. And then he moved her into an apartment in Berlin, which was very cramped. She'd expected to go into this beautiful, spacious mansion that you would expect a count would own, right? And she was stuck in this apartment in Berlin in this kind of society, which I don't have a very good understanding of, but it's like the aristocracy of Germany at that time was called Junker, and it was just incredibly restricted what you could do and how you had to act. I mean, just the way they had to have their meals, for example, everything was so set and well, just very restrictive, the opposite to the freedom that she wanted. So I don't know where I was going on that, about the husbands. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. And in that apartment in Berlin, there's a real sense of confinement. She's always taking the dog for a walk. She's always out cycling. Then she finds this beautiful property, the Schloss, I think it's, is that
Schloss, how you? I think is the German word for castle. Now, Julianne Rumhild, who is on now at the moment, she'll be able to put in the chat what the actual translation is. But yeah, it was a big, it's like a chateau, like a German chateau, in these amazing grounds. And the husband, the Count, owned it, but it had been sitting there for decades and just being, falling to bits. And she arrived there and just said, "Right, that's it. I don't want to go back to Berlin."
Yep. And there's a real sense there, I think, of her life opening up. She goes out into the garden all the time. And then she starts writing about the garden, and she writes a bestseller Elizabeth and her German garden. And I was wondering, would she have become a writer if it wasn't for the garden and if it wasn't for needing that sense of escape? Or was the interest in writing something that might have happened anyway?
Oh, look, I think she was absolutely a born writer and a born storyteller. But I do have this theory about how writers come into being, and that this is my theory, particularly with women writers, is particularly early in life, they are not allowed to verbalize or articulate what they're feeling. So the only way to do that is to write it down. And she was, not only in her family was she oppressed because she was a woman, she was also the youngest, and she had 3 elder brothers immediately sort of above her, and they teased her mercilessly. So she got a really sort of, I mean, I don't think she had an unhappy childhood, but I think it was, I think in the biographies, they talk about her being very alone and apart from the rest of the family. So my feeling is it wasn't the garden that turned her into a writer. I think it was, she had that incredible natural talent, and it was just a way of having a voice when you couldn't have a voice.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And you mentioned one of the previous biographies. So there's 3 biographies about her. So what was it that made you write the book in the way that you did? So you decided, I'm not going to write a biography, that's been done, but you wanted to write something accessible, and then you still ended up putting in snippets of your own life, and you talk about how Elizabeth influenced your own life. So what made you make that decision to structure it in that way?
Well, I guess 2 things. I do find ordinary biographies unbelievably boring, especially the doorstopper ones, right? Because they're not crafted works of art. They are an inventory of someone's life. And then 1920, then she went on this trip, in 1921, and then she did this, and then she went to the letterbox. And, I just can't stand that kind of biography. So, I've been doing it for a while now. I've been writing what we call bibliomemoir, which is really about my relationship with a writer. So, and I think it's just much more interesting because you've got 2 people in a relationship. It's not just a dead person that you're writing about. And the other thing was important to me was I just thought that she had a lot to say to us now. And this was pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. I just felt that she had so much that was relevant to us now. And I felt that her voice had just had been completely lost. And I wanted to bring her back for the joy of everyone else, I guess.
Yeah. Are you a gardener?
I am a passionate gardener. Yes. I'm very proud of my garden. It's looking better than it's ever looked. I have, sorry to show off now, but I have marigolds, I have snapdragons, I have 5 different roses, I have cyclamen, I have Chinese lanterns, I have, I've got lots of amazing, beautiful flowers. In fact, I'm so excited about my garden that when I was giving a tutorial yesterday and the students were a bit bored, I said, okay, come on, I'm going to take you on a tour of my garden and show them my garden. So if it was daylight here, I'd show you my garden, but I can't right now.
Yeah, no, because you talk about trying to keep things alive, like the plants from Western Australia. And
every gardener knows all gardening is full of tragedies. And that's what I loved also about Elizabeth, because she starts off with these grand plans, and then how often that, they don't come up out of the ground and they die for some reason. And I think that's another really magic thing about gardens, is they teach you about disappointment, and you just accept that some things are going to look absolutely beautiful and others are going to be eaten by caterpillars. And, it's a metaphor for life, really.
And a metaphor for writing as well, I think. Sometimes. And yeah. But when you've kind of finished the book, you have these 9 rules for happiness. And one of those rules is freedom. And it struck me that it's not just about freedom for women, it's about freedom for women writers. And Elizabeth was always trying to find time. Well, she made time to write, but she had this place out in the garden, a retreat. She had the sign over the door. Oh, maybe it's Italian, sorry. It says, she had the sign over the door, excuse my terrible translation, sorry, my expression, procul es profani, which translates as begone, you don't belong here.
Or begone, you people who know nothing, you Egypts. I know, I really want that over my front door too, or over my study.
And then I thought, we're always trying to find relationships where you don't have people needing you all the time. And I thought Elizabeth was surrounded by needy people. And then I thought, well, maybe they're not needy. Maybe they're just normal people and writers perceive them as an imposition. But she had a terrible time trying to maintain a space for herself with this very, very overbearing husband. Like the fact that she was spending time on herself rather than time on him. Do you think that was one of the reasons why he got so irascible? Because she wasn't.
Oh yeah, I think that was hugely irritating to him, because I mean he was an incredibly conservative, conventional Junker aristocrat male who thought that women are wives and they have children, and that's all their role. So she was pushing back on that all the time. Yeah, I mean, what else can I say? I suppose I can't, what you're saying about need, you're right. I mean, I think writers are impossible to live with. We're dreadful. I mean, and it just, when you were saying that about neediness, I remember this boyfriend I had who's still a friend of mine, I had in my early 20s, and he was gorgeous, right? Gorgeous looking, lovely guy, absolutely nothing wrong with him, And, but, I got rid of him, and he said, you know what the problem is? He said, you don't need me. And I've kind of always remembered that. And yeah, I don't know. I just think we are difficult, mysterious people, but I've now resigned myself to the fact that it's a kind of vocation, and, I'm stuck with it. That's what I am, and that's what I have to do. And it doesn't really work very well with marriage most of the time.
Oh, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, there has to be a certain set of circumstances for quite there for things to work out. Yeah, but there's this undertone, and Madonna mentioned earlier how Elizabeth was ahead of her time, because there's this undertone in her novels of domestic violence, and like she's fighting back, not just for space for herself, but for her physical person as well. And you mentioned that one of the themes in her novels is that she keeps escaping to England. She wants to get away from him.
Yeah. This is why I thought, who else would have done this? She's in this country estate, which is in the sticks. It's just miles and miles and miles away from anywhere. And she's always finding excuses to go back to London, to civilization, and to get away from the family. And she finds the excuse that her brother's getting married, and the husband won't let her go. And so she just orders the carriage anyway and says, come around, tells the carriage, come around, take me to the station. The husband sends it away again. Midnight that night, she just gets up, walks, climbs out the window and walks the 10 miles or 20 to the local station so she can go, do whatever it is, this incredibly complicated trip back to London. And yet she just ran away. I mean, that's, again, I just think there's something of the Australian feminist in there. I just can't imagine any other, German aristocratic woman in Prussia at that time doing that. So she was pretty wild.
Yeah, you make a good point. But also really, really sharp in terms of management. So management of people, but also management of her household because the husband got in so much debt that she had to rescue him, basically.
This is so extraordinary, really. You know, he's playing the big man who's the boss. Who's paying all the bills? She is. And yeah, so he's just absolutely hopeless at doing what he's supposed to be doing. And you know, I mean, you read her diaries and she's getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning so she can supervise the sausage making. This is before she goes out and starts writing her novels. I mean, she had, when you read about her daily activities, she obviously had an almost supernatural level of physical, mental, emotional energy. She was, I mean, how she did it. And then, you know, sort of, so she had that husband, and then she had the next mad one, and then she had the 12-year affair with the younger man, and she just was unstoppable, unputdownable, and, you know, great model for us all, I say.
That's right, yeah. But I also got the sense that, like, so you mentioned that happiness, the word happy comes up constantly in her writing, but I did get a sense, particularly as her life went on and she had these relationships that didn't really work, that she was practicing being happy. It was an effort. And there was also a sense of mindfulness, particularly when she's out in nature. So she writes about the seasons and how they make her feel, which means that her attention is not on herself, but on the things outside herself and that are affecting how she feels. So I didn't think, like she was obviously a naturally happy person to a degree, but I also think that there was an element of work involved. I was wondering if you had that sense.
Well, I would put it this way, that she had very serious periods of depression. Yeah. So I don't want to give the impression that Elizabeth was born happy and was happy all her life and then she died happy. That is not what happened. She had an incredible capacity to enjoy life, enjoy nature and gardens. I think probably enjoy relationships when they were good, enjoy sex, enjoy friendships, enjoy intellectual stimulation. I mean, she had all that capacity, but she had her terrible low periods as well. And well, it's my view that you have to have the both. You can't do one or the other. So I don't think, my impression is that she didn't work at it, but she became aware that she had to create certain environments for that happiness to be able to well up. So it wasn't something you could force, but you could create certain conditions that would make it easier for that buoyancy to happen.
Yeah, and I think you can see that pattern in her relationship. She's looking for someone who will make her happy, and then when it doesn't work, like H.G. Wells turned out to be a disaster, and she kind of told him to go away. She is trying to create those environments, and I think towards the end you talk about beauty, and she's trying to create a beautiful environment because that makes her feel good.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think my lovely editor is here, and we had a lot of conversations about these 9 principles, and beauty, in a sense, should be in there. The 10th principle should be beauty. Beauty is a very, very important part of happiness, I think.
Yeah. But so was humour, and I wonder if the humour was a strategy, or if she was naturally funny. She must have been naturally funny, but if it was also a strategy to get herself out of dark places. There's this one line in here, I'm going to read it out. She said, and this is after she built the nice house in the Swiss Alps.
Oh yes, the 16-bedroom chalet.
Whenever I feel depressed and lonely, I remember all my lavatories and I'm comforted. And I thought that was wonderful.
Her 7 lavatories. Yeah. Look, she was known as one of the wittiest women around. Everyone wanted her at their parties. But the wit had a really sharp edge to it, and I'm not even sure if this is my theory or I read it somewhere, is that she was teased so much by her elder brothers that sort of developed her own ability. I mean, she had to defend herself, and she did that with humour, but also with satire, I suppose. I mean, there's no one like her for satirising men and their behaviour, and that was her defence. Instead of getting angry and getting unhappy, and which is not good for us, it's not good for the woman. She chose to make fun of whoever was torturing her or making her life difficult, and so that was her defence. I think humour. I think across the board, really, I think that's what humour's about, really.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if the humour is a reason why we don't remember her now, because she hung out with a lot of modernist writers, and we remember who the modernist writers were, and they were writing about really serious things like, the war's broken up society. We don't remember Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Why is satire not taken as seriously as Catherine Mansfield, who was really, not the life of the party?
Yes. We don't want to. I did give the draft of my manuscript to someone who's a very serious Catherine Mansfield scholar, and she thought that I was a bit mean to Catherine Mansfield. And I didn't mean to be mean to her, but I guess there's a bit of a thing between the Mansfield people and the Von Arnim people. Why is Catherine Mansfield so well known and Elizabeth is not known at all? And it does. For me, it does seem to come down to one, is seen as a very serious and modernist writer. I mean, maybe it also has to do with the fact that she died young and that's romantic, and I don't know. But I think there is something in the serious literary mind or scholarly or community that thinks that humour is kind of in this other category, almost like children's literature. That's not real literature. But I guess, maybe it's to do with being a funny woman. Like really, I was lying awake the other night thinking, who are the Australian female comic novelists of today? And if anyone can suggest any, I would love to hear about them, because I just couldn't think of any.
Yeah. I think it's hard to do as well. Humour is hard to do, especially on the page. So in films, we've got slapstick, we can laugh at what people do, but when you have to evoke it with writing, it's much more difficult.
It is such a skill. And if you laughed in my book, that's thanks to Elizabeth. I would love to have that skill, but it's never been natural to me.
Oh, no, I remember I laughed all the way through your James Joyce essay as well.
That's good. Well, that's probably thanks to James Joyce. I mean, he's a comic novelist too.
I think you and Elizabeth are quite similar in your writing.
Right. I just don't have the Swiss chalet. and the millions of pounds, I mean, that's what made her so different too. Imagine being so successful financially. It's just how unusual that is. But, I actually think she was extraordinarily generous as well. She got all that money and it all just got spent on houses or parties or her children. I mean, towards the end of her life, she didn't have anything left, and she was wondering how she was going to make ends meet. And then suddenly Warner Brothers, I think it was, or MGM, whatever, this big movie people in Hollywood offered her a big amount of money for the rights for her last book, which is called Mr. Skeffington, and that was made. She didn't get to see the film because she died beforehand, but that's and I think it's not the greatest portrayal of the book, but still it was a real recognition of her currency culturally, I suppose. And especially how interesting that in America she was huge seller as well.
Yeah.
And in Australia, I mean, that was so fun doing that research and finding all the reviews in Australia. I mean, a lot of people in Australia were reading her, and I don't think all that many people realised that she was Australian born, but a couple did.
Newspapers worked out that she was who she was because she kept her identity a secret. But some of the newspapers in Australia worked it out before the newspapers in England. So I wonder if someone was talking.
Look, that's one of the things I would love to know. I mean, we do know that she admitted to E.M. Forster that she was born in Australia, so I found that really interesting. But it's just there's so many mysteries about her. She avoided publicity. 21 books, never ever did any publicity, and the only interview, and it wasn't even a real interview, was with Life magazine right at the end of her life. And they said she was born in England in that article. And so I just assumed that she told them that. So, yeah, if anyone wants to go and do some more digging around, try to find out what the story is there, that would be great. I couldn't get to the bottom of it.
Well, that was one of the most useful lessons for me. Like, I understood all the others. You have to have a rest, you have to maintain your freedom, you have to lie under trees. But the privacy thing is really significant. And I started thinking of late that the only way we can maintain our privacy in the 21st century is through oral history or memory. And I was thinking of the Russian poet Anna Akhmatova, who had an affair with Osip Mandelstam and memorized all his poems because he was going to get taken. And I started to think, because she wrote stuff down and it was still taken, with that invasion of your privacy, I'm thinking maybe we have to revert to oral histories.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? And we could go back to that old-fashioned thing of learning poems off by heart and all that. That'd be great. I mean, just to let people know, one of the principles of happiness is privacy, that it's essential to have privacy to be able to be happy. And I absolutely believe that. And I think that's our biggest threat now. And I've just come across a book this week actually called something like The Power of Privacy, How to Get Your Data Back or something. Anyways, it's a woman's written, it's coming out in December, and she's got at the end a chapter that tells you how to get your privacy back, and I'm waiting for that to come out. So she was very she was a very private person, and she really valued privacy, and I think that's something we need to think about very seriously now. Yeah,
I think so too. Yeah. And I just had one last question before we open up for questions from the audience. You talk about people having this inbuilt happiness set point. And so I was wondering if you did much research on the science of happiness.
Oh, I did I just skim of that sort of stuff because it's a bit boring. But I mean, there's in the bibliography, there's a book that I've listed there, which is, great big, thick, well-researched book about I think it's something about the stability of happiness and your so-called set point, and that famous study that when people win the lottery, they're really happy for a year and then they come back to the same happiness level that they've always had. And anyway, at the end of all these studies, they found out that you could actually change your happiness set point. So most of us have this particular set point, but we can change it. But you see, I don't really need studies to tell me that because I just know it. So I believe in that. I think it's possible. So I think maybe we just have to take happiness a little bit more seriously. I think it's something that I don't know, we're all so concerned about everything else, aren't we? So
Yeah, because my brother and sister are both naturally very happy people, and someone has said to my brother he could wake up in the rubble of a nuclear war and he'll still be happy. And I'm very gloomy and I write, so that's how I deal with all my issues and my problems. So I was wondering if writers become writers because they are gloomy people, or if they need some kind of mechanism for dealing with what's going on around them. I don't know.
well, there was a part in the book that I think I ended up taking out. I don't think it's there anymore, about how, yeah, out of all the artists, writers are the most depressed of all, that we've got this incredibly, you know, huge percentage of us who are, and you know, I mean, I know just from my friends, and I've been hanging around with writers all my life, that there are too many of them who just think that antidepressants are just a normal thing. You just take them all your life just to keep you above water. And that's bad, you know, that's not good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think people should read your book. I think that's yeah, okay. All right, we've got about maybe 10, 15 minutes for questions. So I'll hand over now to Emma Kate, and she's going to read them out for you. That was a wonderful chat. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thanks, Jessica. Can I just say one thing, that I do owe Jessica one particular thank you for something in the book. It was from you that I got that term plant blindness, one of your things that you had written. So yeah, so I talk about how part of the thing that's wrong with the world is that all these people have got plant blindness, particularly men. They just can't seem to see plants and how beautiful they are. So, and I didn't realize that plant blindness was actually a thing, and now I know it is. So thanks, Jessica.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks, Jessica and Gabrielle. This has been a fantastic discussion, and we've got lots of questions come through, so I'll do my best to answer everybody's. So the first came through from Julianne, and Julianne said that as an Australian feminist, she's always wondered about von Arnim's sense of her Australian birth, and what do you think makes her Australian?
Yes, I'm sure this is highly debatable and quite fanciful from my point of view. That it's just could be a complete fantasy is what I'm trying to say. And Julianne is a beautiful scholar of von Arnim's work and has written some gorgeous essays, and they were great and really inspiring for me when I was writing this book. So what I think about, you know, I mean, we're in this context where it's really hard to talk about what's Australian. That's going to become more controversial and political, isn't it? But I'm going to say it anyway. There is a real straightforwardness about her. There's I'm just going to go out and get what I want. I don't know, there's something about her gardening that I just think there's something Australian about that, as well as wanting to get out and be in the earth. I've got this little idea that I've only just begun to research, and I haven't done enough research, but I do know enough to say that there are other people, not just me, who believe that there's an Australian type of feminism that is different to other sorts of feminism. And, you know, I mean, you think of Germaine Greer. I mean, she's a pretty unusual kind of feminist. You know, she's a feminist of her own, of a particular type. And I would love to sort of just wander down that rabbit hole for a while, researching what makes Australian feminism Australian. But I'm pretty sure that if I did go down that hole and I found the answers to that, that would give you the answer to why Elizabeth von Arnim is Australian. So sorry, Julianne, that's a hopeless answer, but there you are.
Shay has asked a few questions. One is, let's start with this one. Shay said that she observed that Elizabeth's relationships with men in her life from her brothers onwards seemed to be quite oppressive, and those that play out in her novels. She's asked if you can say more about this.
Yes. Well, she's interesting, isn't she? Because there's some, she's she's very interested in tyranny and the way men can tyrannize women and wives and daughters, but she doesn't let women off the hook. There are plenty of female tyrants in her novels as well. So I think she's anti-tyranny, and she wasn't of the opinion that, you know, if we could only sort men out, that everything would be good. I mean, what was the second question? What was the...
Oh, about these experiences, her personal experiences with men seeming to play out. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, we've got to think about that, the time that she lived in. I mean, I don't know if there are any completely unreconstructed men around at that time. I mean, there are very few now. I mean, when people say to me, oh, she was so smart and so funny and so attractive and so wealthy, and why did she end up with such terrible men? And then I just feel like saying, look at Gladys, you know? I mean, I just don't think there are a lot of really smart, intelligent men around that she could have formed relationships with that would have appreciated her and accepted the fact that she needed freedom. I don't know if the people even thought like that then. I mean, I think whatever liberation women have got now, and it's still not a lot, given, you know, men are killing women once a week in Australia, it's very recent. So I think she had troublesome relationships with men because of the times that she lived in.
Thank you. Brona has said, I'm fascinated by Elizabeth's cousinship with Catherine Mansfield. It sounds like they both lived through a number of emotional ups and downs, interesting marriages, etc. How much influence did they have on each other's writing lives as well as their emotional lives?
Well, now this may or may not be true, but it has been written in some books, and so Elizabeth was quite a bit older than Catherine, and Catherine apparently was 11 years old when she read, Julian can correct me here, when she read Elizabeth's first book, Elizabeth and Her German Garden, and some people believe that was the moment when Catherine decided she wanted to become a writer. So I think having a cousin and an older cousin who was really an established writer and successful, I think that was a great thing for Catherine. And my understanding is that, you know, when Elizabeth was really famous and the talk of the town, and she really went and promoted Catherine's case. So she went around saying, look, you've got to read this young writer. She's fantastic. She's got a great potential. So at the time, it was this super famous writer cousin trying to help the younger and also incredibly poor and unwell cousin. So I think she had the role of being a very generous kind of mentor, but I'm probably simplifying. They had their rocky times as well. You know, I mean, writers are competitive. So, but I think generally that it was a very warm and loving relationship, that some of the letters are really beautiful. And the last letter that Catherine Mansfield ever wrote was to Elizabeth.
Thank you. Tessa has asked, during Elizabeth's London sojourns, is there any evidence that she encountered or sought out the Australian diaspora?
No, I wish I could find some. Yeah.
Carolyn has asked...
Sorry, can I just add there, because, you know, I had this little fantasy the other day that there might have been a crossover with Miles Franklin at some point, you know. Yeah, I would love to find something like that, but that's up to someone else can do that work now. Yeah, sorry, Emma.
No problem. Carolyn has asked about the Counts. She says, how did Elizabeth get rid of the Count? Did he just die? Did that change her writing? And how did the second fellow come into the picture?
Okay, so yes, he dropped dead. And I think that was very liberating for Elizabeth. So Elizabeth's not her real name. Her real name was Mary Beecham, and Catherine Mansfield was Catherine Beecham to start with as well. And so what that meant when the husband died was, I mean, she just went crazy really for a little while. That's when she went off to the Swiss Alps and decided she was going to build the chalet, and she became a merry widow, a very, very merry widow. And it also meant that she could, and up until then, she had really tried to keep the pen name a pen name and her real identity a secret, and she managed to do that for many years. But then she didn't have to do it anymore, and she kind of melded her person with her pseudonym and came out as Elizabeth, and she was quite happy then to be known and to be famous and to be feted and all those things. So with the second husband, which happened quite soon really after that, he just walked into the chalet because he'd been invited because he was the brother of Bertrand Russell, and Bertrand Russell's one of the regular visitors at the chalet. I mean, they must have had the most amazing nights and discussions, and there were times when I was doing the research when I just had to put everything down for a moment because I was just seething with jealousy. I was so envious of Elizabeth and her life and her network and her house and her view of the snowy Alps and everything. But anyway, so every summer she'd sit there in that huge chalet and visitors would just arrive and stay for weeks. And so Bertrand Russell's brother, Francis, arrived, and he just walked in and he basically said, yeah, I'll have that woman. She's going to be my next wife. And for the first time in her life, she seemed to just lose her sense of her own destiny, of being able to do what she wanted to do, of her own sense of self-will, and she just fell into his plans. And it was pretty disastrous. But my theory is that they had a very good sex life, and that's really what attracted her and got her to stay with him for, was it 3 years maybe? Yeah, and then she ran away from him as well. She's very good at running away, which is something I can relate to.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and fit in 2 more questions, if that's okay. I have one here from Deborah. Deborah says, hi, Gabrielle. So interesting to hear the background to your research in the book. Is there much information on the public record from Elizabeth's children that provide more insights into the person that she was, particularly during difficult times?
Well, this is such an interesting area. So one of the biographies is written by a daughter, and it's this. So, and there is not a single critical word in it. This is written by the adoring daughter. And there was another one who was not adoring at all and who actually did write an alternative sort of biography, and that got destroyed and burnt. And so we know that in a sense, we don't know anything. Everything is speculation, really. But my understanding is, so there's one incredibly devoted daughter, and it's interesting that that's also the only daughter that she breastfed. The other children were not breastfed. And the others, according to this daughter who adored her, the others found their relationship with the mother difficult because she was so demanding and she had these really high standards, and that I think they felt that they were always disappointing her in some way. So, but I could be completely wrong. It really is, I'm just trying to read in, this is what I have gathered from all the things I've read, and but essentially we don't really know the answer to that question.
Thanks. We've had a couple of people actually mention whether or not we could draw comparisons between Elizabeth and Virginia Woolf. And somebody has also added whether you've been influenced by Woolf in and her subverted biography of Vita Sackville-West.
No, I'm not at all. I find Woolf very, I'm not surprised that she's such a scholarly, such an object of scholarly study, because she seems like an almost scholarly academic kind of writer to me. She's not my kind of writer at all. And she wrote at least one review of one of Elizabeth's novels, and didn't review it very highly, didn't think it was serious literature. So I don't think they had much in common or much relationship with each other, even though, I mean, the only thing that I think is we can talk about is Elizabeth's need for a room of her own and going out and making it. She really just went and got her room. Yeah, so I don't know. That's not, that's the best I can do with that question, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, there was actually a little bit more to it about the freedom to write, about that being the element. Sorry, it's just there's quite a lot here, so I was trying to read through it, but that was it, the comparison about freedom to write. So
yeah. Yes, yeah, there's a lot there. Yes, definitely, there's that link. Absolutely.
And the last question, because we are now unfortunately out of time, even though we've had so many lovely questions and comments come through. Thank you again, Jess and Gabrielle, for such a great discussion. We've been asked, which of Elizabeth's novels do you think that readers should try first? And if it's different, which is your favourite?
Yeah, well, this is what I usually recommend is The Enchanted April, because it's about a beautiful holiday in Portofino, and it's very funny, and it's about women escaping. I mean, most of her books are about women escaping. And then there's the two movies. There's the 1935 version and the 1992 version. Both of them are beautiful. So, and that's for, you know, if you want a bit of enchantment and you want a bit of uplifting. But my favourite one is her most serious one, and it's really different to all the others because it's not as funny, and it really is talking about psychological violence from men and domestic violence. And to me, it's the best book ever written about domestic violence. But although the man in it never raises his fist, he doesn't have to, because everybody's so psychologically terrified by him. Anyway, and so that book is called Vera. That's my favourite.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining tonight. I can tell from all of the comments and questions that you have enjoyed this evening as much as I have. It's been an absolute pleasure, Jessica and Gabrielle, to host this event. I have posted the link for you all to purchase your copies of Only Happiness here in the chat box. And now I will take you all off of mute so that you can join me in thanking Jess and Gabrielle once again. So you should now all be off mute. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess.
Have a lovely rest of the evening.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers.
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 Cheers.